Now, The Hunt Palmer Show.
Waiting to rise again.
You're listening to The Hunt Palmer Show. Brought to you by Corks, Cajun Fried Fish and Shrimp on 104.5 ESPN Baton Rouge.
This is the moment you've all been waiting for.
Locking down the middle of the day. Live from the Mercedes-Benz of Baton Rouge studio. This is Hunt Palmer.
Welcome in. Hunt Palmer coming to you from the Mercedes-Benz of Baton Rouge studio downtown in the capital city on this Friday. It means we're brought to you by Corks, Cajun Fried Fish and Shrimp, working towards the weekend. Hopefully that work week is in the rearview mirror. If it's not, we'll get you there right here on 104.5 ESPN Baton Rouge. Got Jacob Beck and Taylor Sharp back there on the ones and twos and fired up. You're hanging out with us. In 15 minutes, usually we have Preston Geist. Going to sit this one out this week. Sam Spiegelman going to join us. He covers recruiting for Rivals. Does it kind of on a regional and national basis, but LSU's got a big junior day coming up tomorrow, so we'll talk to Sam about that. LSU and Texas tomorrow from the PMAC. I've got a column up on LouisianaSports.net right now. It says it's do or die for this LSU team, and you may have already written them off, and that would be reasonable at 1-6. But if they're going to do anything this year and make anything interesting, it's got to start tomorrow against the Longhorns. They'll also be honoring a really, really good basketball team tomorrow, and we'll talk about that in the second hour. Collis Temple III, who was a member of the 2000 LSU team that won the SEC, made the Sweet 16. We'll talk with him in the second hour. Also got my LSU baseball position preview for today. Because we've got a weekend coming up, and I've got a piece on LouisianaSports.net that's coming up tomorrow, and because you know the characters that are involved, we're actually going to combine shortstop and third base on the radio side of things today and talk about that at the top of hour number 2. So lots and lots and lots to do here over the next pair of hours. Let's get started the same way we start every single day. That's with the Genesis Opening Drive.
It's time for Hunt's Opening Drive, presented by Genesis of Baton Rouge.
Things continue to move in the Saints coaching search, and with the Senior Bowl down in Mobile, kind of the entire league has huddled up on the Gulf Coast. And last year, this is the time of year where you got Clint Kubiak signing with the New Orleans Saints as the offensive coordinator, and the thought is maybe there's an opportunity for the Saints to reach a deal with their next head coach. That has not happened to this point. There are reports that are surfacing day over day about the progress of the search, and the most recent is from the Athletics' Diana Rossini, who's kind of been on the forefront of this Saints coaching search. She said on her podcast, Scoop City, that Kellen Moore may not want to join the Saints because he doesn't like the quarterback situation, doesn't like Derek Carr as the starter for one more year, not totally enamored with Spencer Rattler and Jake Haener at this point. That potentially could be a deal breaker for Kellen Moore. But she came back and said she believes that it's possible that Moore has come around on this issue with a belief that he may be able to get New Orleans to change course with their quarterback situation. Now, y'all know how I've approached this coaching search really from the outset. And it's been a little bit different than a lot of what I've heard, which has been doom and gloom. And I'm not saying that doom and gloom is wrong. I'm just trying to be a little bit more measured here with what I think about the process of this search. I think that it's reasonable to suggest the Saints have approached candidates they were interested in, and those candidates have not reciprocated interest. That's reasonable. I would also suggest that this is not like free agency where the coaches that have said, thanks but no thanks, are proven commodities. They're really not. Outside of Mike McCarthy, you're looking at kind of some upside guys who have never sat in the chair before. And certainly Kellen Moore would be in that category. So I have not flown off the handle and suggested, okay, the Saints are a disaster, worst situation in the league, nobody's going to take this job, the organization is doomed. Like, y'all know how I've approached it to this point. And with the Kellen Moore thing, there was a part of me that was going, okay, if he says no, and the Saints flew up there to talk to him, like, the optics are getting worse, and that's very difficult to argue against. But I've been saying from the start, like, it's about the result, not the process. But if the process yields this consistent result over and over again, it's hard to ignore it and to overstate the rough nature the franchise is in right now. I think that's the nicest way I can say it, okay? But there's another side of this, that if the Saints listen to Kellen Moore and say, okay, we know that what we've done is not great, and we've got a guy that we think has some real upside. We've enjoyed our conversations with him, and he thinks what we've done at quarterback stinks. And then they hire him with the understanding that he's going to rip this thing down to the studs and change the way they're doing things. That may be the breath of fresh air the Saints are actually looking for. No matter if they hired Mike McCarthy or Joe Brady or Kellen Moore or Ben Johnson or Aaron Glenn or anyone, this was not going to be a great football team in 2025. I don't know anybody that's arguing against that. You could probably find Derek Carr. He'd probably argue with you on that. But I haven't talked to Derek about it. So anybody else that I've heard suggests this is not going to be a great team next year. So here's kind of my stance at this very moment. If we understand the Saints aren't going to be good next year, and you're going to hire Kellen Moore, who's not enamored with the quarterback situation, and you may actually move on from Derek Carr in this offseason, well, now all of a sudden, this is a scenario that I find pretty plausible. You hire Kellen Moore, you cut Derek Carr, you take a bath in dead money with a salary cap, you're bad next year, next offseason this time, some salaries start rolling off the books, some of this old, expensive personnel starts to move on, you're picking high in the draft, you've got a coach with a vision who's able to go find the next quarterback that he wants, and you completely rebuild this thing from the start. And if we're being candid, have we not thought the Saints should do that for like 2 years now? All of a sudden, if you've been asking for a rebuild for 2 years and to stop doing salary cap the way that you're doing things and to stop kicking the can down the road and stop extending old players and stop dumping money and trading off draft picks and start an actual rebuild, if we're on the precipice of that actual rebuild, well, what are we complaining about? That's what you actually want. And if you've got a coach that you might hire who's saying this is what you have to do, and the Saints actually listen, whether it's because they want to or they realize they have to because everyone else told them go away, well, you've got to your result. Who cares about the process? It's got to be a rebuild. And if Kellen Moore is the one to make Mickey Loomis and Dennis Lauscha and everybody else in that building realize, hey, this is what it's got to be, well, we're getting there. What do we know about Mickey Loomis? That he didn't want to fire Dennis Allen until Gail Benson finally knocked the door and said, fire this guy, you just lost to the freaking Panthers. And he went there reluctantly and fired him. And if it takes all these coaches they've interviewed saying, no, we're not doing this. This organization is in a terrible spot. And finally, Mickey goes, well, if Mike McCarthy said that, if Aaron Glenn said that, if Joe Brady said that, and if I keep knocking on all these doors, young guys, older guys, defensive guys, offensive guys, and none of them think this is any good, well, that's the consensus. I'm the one who's doing things wrong. Maybe I need to change because now Kellen Moore wants to do it differently. I don't care how Mickey Loomis gets to the conclusion. I don't care if Gail Benson's got to come knock on his door. He's got to get told no by 4 coaches. But if you finally get where you're trying to get, well, then we've accomplished something. Maybe this is the shakeup that needs to happen. I realize this is a little bit of a sunshine point of view here at a time in the Saints organization where there ain't a lot of sunshine. But it's the reality. It's not like I'm changing my tune here. I'm saying, like, wait till we get the result. I saw a little bit of a shift in the way the Saints did business last offseason. If we see a bigger shift in this offseason, you know where the direction is. And there's no guarantee tearing it down to the studs and rebuilding it is going to work. It never works in Cleveland. It never works in Jackson. Like, there are plenty of places where it never works. Tanking does not automatically mean you're going to come out on the other side. Not everybody is the Houston Astros, who intentionally sent the organization down the toilet for 3 years and then made the AL Championship Series at a very minimum for 7 years straight. That's not guaranteed. You can be the Sixers. They hadn't won squat. They actually made a big deal out of the fact they were tanking. So it doesn't guarantee success. But the way the Saints have been doing things was essentially guaranteeing, at best, mediocrity, And at worst, a situation where you're looked as the most untenable situation in the entire National Football League. So while it's reasonable for Saints fans to sit back and look at these reports and all these coaches saying no and say, oh my goodness, we're never going to get out of this. That's a reasonable thing to think when you're a fan with that much passion as the Saints fan base has, how frustrating this could be. But if you want to just take a step back and look at the other side of things and go, maybe this is what actually had to happen. The Saints aren't going to be good next year. The direction has to change. And if Kellen Moore is the guy who's going to figure that out and force that change on the organization, while admitting I know it doesn't guarantee anything, it feels like it's the best dose of medicine for this franchise. That's the way I'm thinking about this right now. We'll see. Nothing's set in stone. Kellen Moore's got a pretty important game coming up next week. Just so happens to be in New Orleans. I don't know when things are going to happen. Maybe he picks up the phone this afternoon, calls the Saints brass and says, I'm out. And then you're looking around going, okay, Mike Kafka, you want the job? Darren Rizzi, you still got a parking spot here? And we'll react to that if that's the case too. But right now, we don't have anything set in stone other than the fact that there are reports saying Kellen Moore may be coming around, assuming there can be changes made at the most important position on the field. We'll see. That's our opening drive presented by Genesis of Baton Rouge. If you're looking for Saints coverage, you can find it at louisianasports.net. Ross Jackson's got a piece up on the top of the site right now. Said, report more not sold on Saints job. You can read Ross's thoughts right there. You can also find my thoughts at Hunt on Saints on YouTube or wherever you find your sound. Hunt on Saints, all Saints coverage all year long. When we come back, we're going to chat with Sam Spiegelman. It's junior day at LSU. There are a couple of high profile in-state guests that are coming to LSU's campus this weekend. What are LSU's chances to land those guys? And who else can LSU expect in a big weekend for the class of 2026? That's all coming up on The Hunt Palmer Show.
The Hunt Palmer Show.
Genesis of Baton Rouge. GenesisofBatonRouge.com is the website. Every car on the lot is online at GenesisofBatonRouge.com, and that makes your shopping experience a lot easier, at least to begin with. You go to the website, just start surfing around. Look at the sedans, look at all the SUVs. If you see something you like, start the process. Get in touch with Genesis of Baton Rouge. You can do it online. Have one of their brand ambassadors come to you, whether it's at work, got a little bit of time during a lunch break, you can take a test drive. They can do it for you. Got a little time at home, take a little test drive, they'll drive to you. It's just about convenience at Genesis of Baton Rouge. If you decide after that test drive, hey, I think this is the car for me, well, that's awesome. And you never have to go to the dealership to make sure that happens. You can sign an e-contract. They can do delivery right to you. You never have to set foot on the lot, and you can be in a Genesis Baton Rouge. And if you do that, you get a 10-year, 100,000-mile warranty plus 3 years of complimentary valet maintenance. It's all part of the experience at Genesis of Baton Rouge. Check them out online, genesisofbatonrouge.com, genesisofbatonrouge.com.
You're listening to The Hunt Palmer Show, brought to you by Corks, Cajun fried fish and shrimp.
Chugging right along here, Friday edition of the Hunt Palmer Show. We're presented by Corks, Cajun fried fish and shrimp. Check out that menu online, corksfishandshrimp.com. Big junior day this weekend for LSU football. Sam Spiegelman covers recruiting nationally for Rivals and Yahoo Sports. Good enough to give us a little bit of time here on this Friday. Joins us on the Jim's Firearms Hotline. Sam, how are you?
I can't complain, hon. How's it going on your end?
It's going quite well. Let's talk. I want big picture first before we start talking about LSU's junior day. We know that the transfer portal is all the rage these days, and Brian Kelly was one of the coaches who was very, very open with the fact that they were going to build this program from the high school ranks and rely a little bit on the portal. And somewhere over the course of the last 8 months, his tune has changed, and LSU obviously went really hard in the transfer portal after the 2024 season. As far as high school recruiting goes with juniors, is it still the frenzy that it always was, or have you seen some programs kind of cool on 16 and 17-year-olds?
No, I think to your point, it's a more big picture effort with these college football front offices, if you will. Brian Kelly is following a similar trajectory as, Ryan Day this time a couple of months ago when, they decided to bulk up their transfer portal budget, go out and get some of the best players in the country, including the quarterback they just won a national championship with, Caleb Downs, on the defensive side of the ball. And yeah, Ohio State competes for national recruiting titles every single year. They're in the mix with the top 5 or so class year in and year out, and that's the way that LSU is currently modeling their efforts. LSU has continued to recruit at an extremely high level. That we know. They just signed a top 10 class in 2025, and the state is loaded with talent for 2026, 2027, 2028, and beyond. And LSU is always at its best when they recruit their home state, which they're on track to do really well in 2026. Of course, to compete in this national landscape, you need to be doing both at a really high clip. And what we're seeing BK and the Tigers do this offseason shows that they're in it to win it. And they got a product that should be in the mix for a playoff spot next year if these evaluations go correctly.
Let's talk about that loaded state that you were talking about in 2026. A couple of guys in the state, Jamar Brown and Blaine Bradford, are expected on campus this weekend. So tell us about those two guys as prospects and how you feel LSU sits with those two.
Yeah, let's start with Blaine. Blaine Bradford is the number one safety on Rivals. He's pretty consensus top safety in the country, no matter where you look. He's a Rivals 5-star. He's from right there at Baton Rouge Catholic. He missed the majority of his sophomore season due to injury, and he came back in the state championship game, had a game-breaking interception, nearly returned it to the house. And then as a junior was absolutely stellar. This camp season, he worked out at Bama, Ohio State, LSU. At 6'2", 205 pounds, clocked a 4.40. He actually almost picked off Bryce Underwood during the 7-on-7 portion of LSU's camp. At this point, he is probably the most coveted safety in the country. We know his older brother Jacob signed with LSU in December. LSU is going to be in it until the end with the state's top safety. Oregon and Ohio State aren't going anywhere. Alabama is also in the mix here. But really, Ohio State in particular and Oregon, with getting him on campus for the first time earlier this month, have both made this one a little bit more interesting. And then Lamar Brown is the number one interior offensive lineman in the country. He actually was meeting with Brian Kelly earlier today, who was at U-High. Lamar Brown has been an early LSU lean for the early portion of his recruitment, but as his junior year came to focus, we saw the Aggies kind of chipping away, and they got him on campus, I think it's 6 times since June, and they're scheduled to get him on campus 2 more times before an official visit. LSU has a little bit of catch-up to play with Lamar Brown. I think they're not only recruiting him to play on the offensive line, but he's maybe even more open to playing defense. So Bo Davis, Blake Baker have been getting involved. They'll get him on for a junior day visit this weekend. They'll try to secure an OV. We know that A&M, Alabama, Oregon, and Tennessee are all in the mix to host Lamar this summer.
Very, very interesting that A&M could come into to U-High and make some significant inroads there. That's not something that I had on my old proverbial bingo card there, but here we are, I guess. Speaking of some other folks that are expected on campus here in the class of 2026, some LSU commitments, Aiden Hall as well as Kenny Darby, a couple of guys from inside the state. What can you tell us about those two?
Yeah, Kenny just led the state in receiving this past season for Airline High School over there in Shreveport. He got his offer from LSU at the back end of the season, wasted no time committing to Cortez Hankton, Joe Sloan, and those guys. And Darby's been a regular visitor since getting that offer. Even before, it was it was one of those situations where that was the offer he was waiting for and didn't waste time jumping on it. But everyone else caught wind after he committed. Texas A&M threw an offer. Tennessee, Alabama, schools across the country have been trying to catch Kenny's attention, but he was scheduled to go to Alabama last weekend. Instead, Coach Sloan, Coach Kelly showed up at Airline High School. He shut his recruitment down. He'll be back in BR this weekend. That's a really good sign for the like I said, this really talented 2026 class. Aiden Hall from Edna Carr, a part of this early 2026 class, committed this summer with teammate Big Rich Anderson. We know Edna Carr were the state champions this year. A lot of schools across the country still have a lot of interest in Aiden Hall. He picked up an offer from Auburn. today. We know that Ole Miss has been in his recruitment for a while. Oregon really likes Aiden Hall. Getting him back on campus is just another huge step for LSU, holding on to this prize commitment out of the state of Louisiana. We know they'd love to pair him with Blaine Bradford. That would potentially give LSU two of the top 5 safeties in the country right from their backyard. They're going to have to hold on for the rest of this roller coaster, but Aiden Hall hasn't visited anywhere else, despite a lot of schools coming through Carr trying to get him to.
I'm curious as far as commitments go. In this world of NIL, and I realize that revenue sharing is coming, so maybe it doesn't matter as much, but are you seeing less early commitments from juniors, whether early in their school year or later in their school year? Because once you do that, you may kind of shut off the bidding war a little bit. Do you find that are players that are waiting a little bit longer?
Actually, quite the opposite.
Really?
Because you're seeing kids commit early. They find the school that they think is the best fit. They lock in their spot and they try to shut things down. Even if they want to shut things down, you have this period where coaches are on the road. You have the spring when coaches are back on the road during spring practice coming by the high school. And then you have official visits that, coaches are saying, why don't you just at least come visit here, take a look at us before you sign on the dotted line and make sure that, X school is where you want to be. And sometimes the school will say, go out and see what else is out there and make sure that this is where you want to be too, because we haven't even touched on the element of the transfer portal. And, we've seen kids be on campus for days before hitting the portal. So we live in a very, unique time in terms of college football athletics and the way that transactions goes. So you might get you still get a plenty of early commitments, and once in a while, I would say they stick. But we're seeing a more common approach where we're seeing probably 2 commitments for a high-profile kid in the 4 and 5 star range. Not everyone, but there are a good chunk of kids that'll make an early decision. Then they will basically go through a second turn of this process through these summertime official visits. And then, of course, you have always the in-state pushes for schools like LSU, like Auburn and Alabama, like Texas and Texas A&M across the SEC, where if there's someone who has a breakout senior year, the home state is going to try to their best to try to keep them in state, even if they're a little bit late. We've seen it at LSU. We've seen it all over the country. So there's different phases of these recruiting processes, trust me.
Yeah, that in-state kid that blows up happens every single year. You never know exactly where it's going to come from, but certainly in Louisiana, that's somebody that's always going to pop up late in the process. Sam Spiegelman's our guest, national recruiting analyst for Rivals. Elijah Haven has gotten a lot of attention, as he should, in South Louisiana, and there was news earlier this week that he signed an NIL deal with a car dealer based out of New Orleans. What do you think about the recruitment of Elijah Haven? We got a long way to go, as he's just a sophomore at the Dunham School here in Baton Rouge, but how big do you think this has the potential to get?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be. I don't want to say it's going to be to the same magnitude as Arch Manning, but much like Arch, you're talking about not only the number 1 quarterback in the country being from South Louisiana, but potentially just the number 1 overall player in the class. Elijah was absolutely fantastic his first year at Dunham, just being the best player on the field, each and every Friday night, and then we saw him just take a massive leap forward as a sophomore. I think he already holds every single record over there at the Dunham School. Not only did they play for a state championship, he put up, I think, over 500 total yards, gave them an absolute chance to win down to the fourth quarter. At that position, the high-level development that he's showing, the character of the kid, and I think that the way that his recruitment is drawing the eyes of coaches from, these powerhouses across the country. He's been at Michigan, he's been at Texas A&M, he's been at Alabama, he's been at LSU. This is, I don't see this being a very dramatic recruitment by any means. We know that Derek Stingley went through the Dunham School and had a very tempered recruitment. It was, pretty standard. I kind of expect the same approach. Neil Weiner is still the coach over there, and he has things done a certain way. And the way that the Havens go about business is very, very mature, very smart, diligent approach. So I think he could be someone who commits early. I think he'll explore his options. I think LSU is not only very much involved. I think that they're the early team to beat, but Louisiana has 3 really talented quarterbacks in its backyard this year for 2027 rather. 2 of them hold offers, and the third is the little brother of the starting quarterback, Colton Nussmeier, out of Dallas. So it's going to be an interesting roller coaster for Joe Sloan and BK to handle. But right now they're in a good spot with the number 1 guy on their board.
He's Sam Spiegelman. You can find him at Rivals. He's a national recruiting analyst for them. If you're looking for LSU Junior Day updates throughout the weekend, you can certainly find them from our guy, Sam Spiegelman. Thanks, man. Have a great weekend.
Yep, you too, Hunt. Thanks for having me.
It is our pleasure. Chugging right along here on a Friday edition of the Hunt Palmer Show. We're brought to you by Cork's Cajun Fried Fish and Shrimp. Late lunch, right there, government between Foster and Jefferson. Want to feed the fam this weekend. Cork's always great to do that. They're also happy to feed in bulk. If you're feeding the office, want to do a lunch, birthday party, whatever the case may be, Cork's can help you out with that. Big trays of that delicious crispy fried catfish, jumbo Gulf shrimp, honey butter rolls, beignet bites, crawfish etouffee, coleslaw. They got it all over there at Cork's. Check them out on Government Street. CorksFishandShrimp.com. We come back. Going to be a great day inside the PMAC tomorrow, honoring a great team from 25 years ago. We'll talk with Collis Temple III about that coming up in hour 2, but I want to preview LSU and Texas when we come back.
The Hunt Palmer Show.
Audio Video Security Solutions, avssla.com is that website. For our security system at the Palmer House, it's Audio Video Security Solutions. They put in our burglar alarm. We got keypads up by the back door and in our bedroom. We can arm the alarm from anywhere, remotely, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We can disarm it as well. I've got cameras on the front door and the back door, crystal clear picture. I never pay any cloud storage fees. We can rewind, pause, whatever the case may be. And it's all because of the folks at Audio Video Security Solutions. And the beauty of it is, if we ever have an issue, generally it's self-inflicted. We got Mitchell Fisher's cell phone number. My wife or I sends him a text, give him a call. They're there that afternoon or the next day without fail. That's the beauty of a local company that has fantastic customer service after the installation. It's Audio Video Security Solutions. Give Mitchell Fisher a call. He's in the 225 area code, obviously, right here in Baton Rouge, and he's at 439-7920. Again, that's 439-7920. You can find them online at avssla.com. It's Audio Video Security Solutions, avssla.com.
This is the Hunt Palmer Show, brought to you by Cork's Cajun Fried Fish and Shrimp.
Working towards the weekend here on a Friday edition of the Hunt Palmer Show. We're in the Mercedes-Benz of Baton Rouge studio, brought to you by Cork's Cajun Fried Fish and Shrimp. Cool day tomorrow inside the PMAC. 1 hour from now, we're going to talk with Collis Temple III. He was a redshirt freshman on the 2000 LSU basketball team that really rose LSU from the ashes, as it were. You're talking about a program that was just riddled by probation, and you're talking about a program that was on the hardest of times. Dale Brown had LSU absolutely humming for a decade and a half, really, throughout the 80s into the very early 90s. And obviously probation hit, and LSU basketball fell off a cliff. And when the 99-2000 team hit the floor, you're talking about a program that had gone 13-51 in SEC play from 96 to 99. 13-51. And that team went 12-4 in the league, won it outright, and made the Sweet 16. It was Stromile Swift, Jabari Smith, Ronald Dupree, Brian Bashera, Taurus Wright, Jermaine Williams, Lamont Rowland, Collis Temple III. Just a really, really good team and an incredibly fun team to watch. And I think most people that are listening have a team that made you fall in love with that sport. Like for me, it wasn't until the 2000 LSU baseball team. Like that's the team I really got behind. I absolutely remember watching Warren Morse's home run. I definitely remember LSU winning in 97. I was at my grandparents' house as a 9-year-old, and they had to bring me back to my parents' house during the game. So we listened on the radio, and I cried in the back seat because I couldn't be home in time for the dog pile. I wanted to see the dog pile, and I couldn't see the dog pile. So I was aware of those teams. The 2000 team I followed really, really closely. I can still tell you that it was Cressy, Haup, Fontenot, Terrio, Barbier, Witten, Harris, Wright, like I can still give you I can't give you that for 96. I can't give you that for 97 either, but I can for 2000. And that's the team that made me really fall in love with LSU baseball. For LSU football, Kelvin Falk's team in 97, that was great, beating Florida. But really, to me, the SEC championship team in 2000 was the one that like really set the hook. I loved that team a ton with Rohan Davey and Josh Reed, and they smashed Illinois in the Sugar Bowl. And this team for basketball for me, this is not hyperbole, not at all. I don't have a single LSU basketball memory that predates the 1999-2000 season. Not one. I didn't look this up, but like I could not name one player on LSU's 1997 basketball team. Not one. I don't even know if I can get it multiple choice. And y'all know like how closely I've followed LSU for most of my life. I just told you that I watched Warren Morris's home run in 96 and I cried in 97 when I couldn't see the dog pile for LSU baseball in the College World Series. Like I was clearly an LSU fan. I don't have one memory that predates the team that they're going to honor tomorrow. None. I wasn't old enough for Shaq and Chris Jackson. I was born in 88, the early 90s. I got no chance on that. So this is the team that kind of introduced me to LSU basketball. And they were so freaking fun to watch. I remember vividly watching that Arizona game. And there are some highlights that have been playing on Twitter today of that team in that game. And right before the half, LSU gets a steal and Jabari does the fake behind the back and dunks it as halftime erupts. And LSU's up 16 at the break against Gilbert Arenas and that Arizona team. Just incredible stuff from them. They beat Texas NCAA tournament. They go to the Final Four, Sweet 16, and they play, that Bo Ryan Wisconsin team that ground the game to a paste. And LSU, I hadn't looked it up. I think they scored in the 30s or 40s in that game. It was a gross game, but LSU ended up losing it. But a team that really took LSU's basketball program and resurrected it from the doldrums of that probation. And that team will be honored tomorrow. And I really hope there's a really good crowd because apparently they've got really good attendance. Brandon Landry was on that team. He's going to have a get-together at Walk-Ons for him tonight. And Stromile Swift is here. He met with the media over at LSU's practice facility today with John Brady. So he was kind of the face of that team, he and Jabari. So that'll be a really, really cool thing. Incidentally, my AOL screen name, there are some of you that are like, what the heck is that? And some of you are like, yeah, that's my wheelhouse. My AOL screen name for a couple of years was Taurus43. Which was Taurus Bright. He was my favorite player on that team because he was the point guard, which is what I did growing up, dribbled, and then he shot a bunch of threes. And I like to shoot a lot of threes. So he was my guy on that team, even though you were talking about Stromile and Jabari that were the elder statesman. Taurus was a freshman on that team. So we'll talk about that team in more detail coming up with Collis Temple III in the second hour. But I kind of wanted to give my thoughts on that. LSU will play Texas tomorrow in the game, and I talked about this a little bit yesterday. I wrote a column about it at LouisianaSports.net today. LSU right now is in do or die mode. And if you are firmly in the camp of this team has no chance to resurrect itself, I don't blame you for that at all. You're talking about a team that doesn't shoot the three well at all, that cannot protect the basketball, that does not defensive rebound. They're 1-6 in the league. It's very, very bleak at best. But here's what's coming up in the next 6 games. Texas at home. That's a team with a losing record in the SEC. You're at Georgia, who has a losing record in the SEC. Ole Miss comes to you. They beat you pretty good in Oxford. We'll see if you can maybe punch up at home. It is a home game. But then you've got at Arkansas, who's a mess. You're at Oklahoma. Those two teams, Arkansas and Oklahoma, although they're road games, they're 3-11 in the league. They're not very good. Then you got South Carolina coming to the PMAC, and they haven't won a game in league play yet. So if LSU could go 4-2 over that, here's what you'd have to do. You'd have to beat Texas at home. You'd have to go to Georgia and win. You'd have to split Arkansas and Oklahoma on the road, and then you got to beat South Carolina. And if you can do that, then you would look up and you'd be 5-8 in league play. And I said you needed to get to 7 to get to the NCAA tournament or have a chance. And if you got to 5-8, you'd have to go at that point 2-3 the rest of the way to get to 7-11. I'm not telling you I think I like their chances at all. But this is the soft part of the schedule. And it starts with Texas. That's a team that's 14-7. They're 3-5 in league play. They got crushed at A&M by 20 points to open league play. Then they lost 2 really close games at home to Auburn and Tennessee, who were good. Auburn beat them by 5. Tennessee beat them by 4. They played those two teams tight in Austin. They went to Oklahoma and finally got their first SEC win. Then they went to Florida and lost by 24 points. They beat Missouri in Austin, and then they beat Texas A&M in Austin, but they were down 22 points in the second half of that game, and then they stormed back and won it, and they just went to Ole Miss and gave the Rebels all they could handle in Oxford. That was a 3-point game. They're pretty good on paper. I don't know if it's a great team, but statistically speaking, they're okay. They're 26th in offensive efficiency. They're 51st in defensive efficiency. There is a reason that I think this is a reasonable matchup for LSU in this game. Texas plays very slow. In terms of possessions, they're 249th in the SEC. Only 249th in the SEC. 249th in the country. Only Tennessee in the SEC plays slower than Texas. So it would not stand to reason that Texas is going to speed LSU up and into a ton of turnovers. You wouldn't think that's going to happen. Texas plays pretty slow. And they don't rebound it great on the offensive end. They're 164th in the country in offensive rebounding. So if you limit the possessions, you allow LSU to play first shot defense, which they're pretty good at, and Texas doesn't crash the boards too hard on offense, maybe you can hold them in the 60s. Maybe. And if you can, you've got a chance on the other end. Texas only is 172nd in opposing turnovers per possession. It's not like they force a ton of them. That's LSU's biggest bugaboo. Now, Trey Johnson's a star. He plays for Texas. He's a freshman. He's 6'6". He was a 5-star recruit, consensus top 5 player in the country coming out of Dallas. He will be a lottery pick in this draft. He's awesome. He is scoring 19 points per game. At least listen to some of these point totals against the teams he's doing it against. 30 against A&M, pretty good defensive team. 26 on Tennessee, great defensive team. 22 on Ole Miss, great defensive team. 24 on UConn. I don't think I have to tell you too much about UConn. They don't appear to be the beast they've been the last 2 years. It's still UConn. So he's putting up big numbers on really good defensive teams. He's a guy LSU's going to have to deal with. I'm not sure how they do it, but they're going to have to find a way to slow him down. Arthur Kaluma's another wing. He's a senior, scoring 14, grabbing 8 rebounds a game. He scored 34 points on Auburn, which you just saw Auburn. That's pretty impressive. However, he hasn't scored more than 14 on any SEC team, so a bit of an outlier there. But those are their 2 wings who can get points for him. Jordan Pope's a little point guard they got, and they've got a 6'11 guy who will start for him in the post. But Rodney Terry needs to win some games in year 3 down the stretch, I think, to keep his gig in Austin. He got the job, remember, when Chris Beard was let go because of the legal ramifications, and Terry took over, and he took him to the tournament, and they made a little bit of a run, so they gave him the reins of the program. They haven't been great since then. Texas is better than LSU, but it's at home in the PMAC. Saturday, 5 o'clock tip, honoring a team's 25th anniversary, maybe a decent crowd for a big brand matchup. And if LSU can find a way to win, you've got a chance to make things fairly interesting. But let's be frank about it. Like, their chances to do that are slim and none, and Slim's at least packed. I don't know if Slim's out the door, but it's packed. So it's got to start tomorrow. If they lose tomorrow, then you go on the road, you play Georgia, and if you don't get that done, you can turn out the lights. I told you it was a must-win against Arkansas. They got it done. I would have liked to see them steal one of the last 3. They weren't able to do it. It's a team with a lot of flaws, and I realize that a lot of y'all would rather me just start talking about the backup defensive line and junior days all for 2 hours and then get to baseball. I gotcha, but we're going to cover them until we just simply can't afford to do it anymore. So tomorrow I'm excited to see what the PMAC looks like, excited to celebrate the 25th anniversary of that really fun 2000 team. We'll talk about it with Collis Temple III. But LSU and Texas tomorrow in the PMAC at 5 o'clock. That's when they'll tip things off on campus. All right, when we come back, a little bit more SEC basketball. There's a storyline that's just interesting to me. It's interesting because of its SEC ramifications. It's interesting because some of the quotes that we got yesterday. It's an interesting deal. We'll close out the hour with it. We'll talk baseball in 15 minutes. The Hunt Palmer Show.
The Hunt Palmer Show. You're listening to The Hunt Palmer Show. Brought to you by Quirks, Cajun fried fish and shrimp.
All right, Jacob Beck and Taylor Sharp, I need y'all to be very honest with me. I'm going to ask y'all both a question. Be very honest, because I feel like I know kind of where y'all's interests lie. You're LSU guys, you're SEC guys, but I think football probably rules the roost for you. This is a basketball story. Are you interested at all in John Calipari coaching at Rupp Arena tomorrow? Does that interest you at all, Jacob Beck?
Yes.
Taylor Sharp?
No, because Arkansas is not any good.
They're not good. They're not. But I'm fascinated by it because when John Calipari left Memphis to go to Kentucky, it was a huge deal. And it was the perfect hire for Kentucky because for that 7 or 8 years, he was the most feared man in college basketball. I think even more so than Roy Williams or Mike Krzyzewski because of the ridiculous raw talent that he was bringing in at Kentucky. And he put that team together that ended up winning the national championship with Anthony Davis, and then a few years later they had the Harrison twins, and then that was with Karl Anthony Towns and Willie Cauley-Stein, and I didn't think that team could ever lose. I remember vividly, I was covering LSU at the time day to day for Bayou Bengals Insider, and I was going through statistics to write an advance for the story, and I stumbled across a stat that team, which the Harrison twins were their starting backcourt, and they were both 6'6". So that was the shortest guys they had on the court were 6'6". And they had Willie Cauley-Stein, who was 7 feet, and Karl Anthony Towns, who was 6'11". And they rebounded 52% of their misses at that point, which is in February, which is just a ridiculous. But I mean, the point being, they were great, and they just didn't quite get it done. A couple times when they had probably the best team, and then it got stale, and then Duke caught on and started getting the one and dones, and they were getting Jabari Parker and Jahlil Okafor and Austin Rivers and some of those guys, Kyrie Irving, and those were the guys Cal was getting, and then Duke started to get them, and he still recruited at a pretty high level, but they just weren't winning, and then all of a sudden you start losing to St. Peter's, and you start and it got really, really stale, and he's going to go into Rupp tomorrow, and this is a quote that John Calipari gave on his weekly radio show. My guess is I'm going to get booed, but that's all part of it. Shoot, you get booed. I've done this so long, I'll tell you, I've got bazooka holes in my body, so when you shoot arrows, it doesn't even hit skin. But it'll be interesting. I can't say I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to coaching, but to walk in, the vibe, I don't know how I'm going to take it, to be honest with you. And that's interesting to me. I think John Calipari is probably a pretty good dude. I think I'd really enjoy grabbing a beer with him and telling stories. I don't think he's a great basketball coach. I think he's a dynamic presence who won a lot of games based on his skill as a recruiter and a program builder and an assembler of talent. And so I don't think it's going to work at Arkansas, and I think it was time for Kentucky to move on. But I do feel the human side of this, that John Calipari put a lot of time and a lot of effort into winning a ton of games at Kentucky, including a national championship. And this is a team that had Gillespie as the head coach, that ran Tubby Smith out of town. And just because it got stale at the end, and now Mark Pope's winning games in January and February, which, by the way, John Calipari won a lot of games in January and February. It's just the 40 minutes in March that Kentucky fans want to go nuts about, not dissimilar to Paul Maneri in Baton Rouge. And for them to roundly boo him tomorrow, to me, just feels a little bit off. And I'm not as obviously as connected as the Kentucky fans, and there's a great quote from Matt Jones, who's a Kentucky sports radio guy who's got a great business, who calls Kentucky "we" on the air. He's in my ilk of folks that just aren't. This is where my allegiance lies. This is who I wants to win. I'm going to talk about it. Whether you want to call me a fanboy or a homer or whatever the case may be, this is how I'm going to present myself, and that to me is pretty genuine and authentic, and that's the way that I present myself, and Matt Jones is that way. And he gave a quote in this Dan Wolken column on USA Today that says, it just got too toxic at the end. He was blaming the fan base. He was giving excuses. He bristled at any sort of criticism. It was toxic at the end. And you know what? Sometimes that happens. And maybe in 5 years, 8 years, when he gives it up at Arkansas and rides off into the sunset, he can come back for the Anthony Davis reunion and all will be well and good. They just did that with Rick Pitino, who, by the way, coached Louisville for a long time after he left for the Celtics and then came back to college. And all is good with Rick Pitino in Lexington. And I'm assuming that day will come with John Calipari too. It's just too fresh and too new. I get it to an extent. But to me, when you do as many good things as John Calipari did for Kentucky, and then you come back and you're not booed because you're wearing an Arkansas sweatshirt. You're booed because they don't like you right now. And that, to me, there's a human side of that kind of eats at me a little bit. Like, clearly I'm not expecting the Kentucky fans to, like, say, oh, well, I hope Cal does well today. I hope we'll give it a good shot. Like, there's a game to be played, and Kentucky's trying to work their way up the seeding ranks and build this team into a potential team that can make a run in March. I get the whole thing, but it's fascinating to me. Kentucky basketball fascinates me. It's the standard bearer in the SEC, the same way that really Alabama has been in football and the same way that LSU is in baseball. And as I said all the time, I wasn't going to break down whether or not South Carolina is going to fire their basketball coach last year. I was never going to do that with Texas A&M. With Kentucky, it's a story to me. And so John Calipari will go back to Rupp tomorrow, and I'm very curious how he's received and kind of what that is. It feels like he kind of knows what's coming. They're going to get beat pretty bad. I know that. But interesting thing to me, at least. We'll pause for SportsCenter. We'll come back, talk some baseball. Left side of the infield next.
The Hunt Palmer Show.